In this episode, I'm excited to have a chat with someone from my hometown of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. She's as passionate as I am about making the world a better place. I met Mary Triggiano decades ago when she was the managing attorney for Legal Action of Wisconsin, the state's largest nonprofit law firm committed to ensuring access to the justice system, especially for those least able to afford it. Since I last connected with Mary, she's lived a full professional life, including working as a judge in children's court, domestic violence court, and the civil division, as well as serving as chief judge for the Wisconsin judicial district that includes Milwaukee County. In her quest to help reshape the justice system to be more humanistic through especially a restorative practices approach, Mary has accomplished so much in the court system, from launching and expanding initiatives, including addressing root issues within families to get them back on track so children that had been removed can be returned to their families and have a better chance to heal and succeed, and programs to better serve the most vulnerable victims, babies impacted by substance use. Mary seemed like the perfect candidate to be hired recently as the first permanent director of Marquette University Law School's Andrews Center for Restorative Justice. I feel lucky to get some time with her as she's still settling into her new role. You know me, I'm going to bring my depth psychology lens to this critical topic of justice. So let's get started. Welcome, Mary. How are you doing? And how are you settling into your new position?
Well, first of all, thank you, Deb, for having me on your podcast. I'm very excited to be here with you and reconnect.
Me too.
Um, so I haven't missed a beat.
Of
Um,
course.
I got here, rolled up my sleeves. Everyone has been very welcoming and supportive. I think not only the students, but faculty and the dean of the law school are very excited about having this restorative justice now a center rather than an initiative. And so we're working hard and doing my best to build it up.
I love it. And I'm sure a lot of people are looking at you to like lead the way, or I love it going from an initiative to a center. Yes,
Yeah,
it's permanent.
absolutely.
Yeah. So I already said in the intro, like how we met and how many years have gone by. And justices, from a depth psychology perspective, it's such a huge concept. And we're just going to touch on a little bit of it today. But I thought I'd like to start with this concept of restorative justice, because when concepts first come out, people really are paying attention and like, oh, what is that? And it seems as time goes on, it becomes kind of like this word or term that people throw around with, like I've noticed on Twitter, like narcissists. And I recently posted a tweet and I said, what is the ease with which you feel that you could call other people narcissists really reveal about you? So anyway, it's like it loses its power as people think they know what it means. So I thought we could do a little education. And I really liked the definition on the Marquette University, the center's website. I thought it's the most clear, compelling, and concise definition that I've ever heard. So I want to actually read it to my readers and viewers, and then I'm going to include the link in the description box. So this is what it says. Restorative justice is an approach to harm or crime that is very different from the traditional legal system. The traditional approach is often punitive. It focuses on what laws were broken, who broke them, and how the justice system should deliver punishment. This system was not really set up to help justice-involved persons and victims overcome the many challenges after the harm has been committed. And in some instances, the traditional approach actually causes additional harm and inequity for those involved. On the other hand, restorative justice's focus on supporting people who have experienced harm, reducing harm, and restoring relationships has been a game changer in the right cases. So, and I think this is important, is that restorative justice has become an important part, but it does not replace the traditional approach. And when I read this, of course, from a depth psychology perspective, it reminds me of this split between the masculine and the feminine and the great wound that we all carry, the patriarchal wound, which is a one-sided valuing of a masculine approach, not meaning man, but a masculine approach being linear, straightforward. It can be, just, sort of this black and white to it, at the exclusion of the feminine approach, not women, which really is more connection, pattern seeking, meandering, not straightforward, and it's relationship oriented. So the masculine not being bad, but we live in a system that there's not balance between the two. So that's kind of how I think about restorative justice, is that it's bringing balance, a more balanced approach to the issues, with its focus on relationship. And I know we're going to talk about some really powerful stories in a little bit that help people understand why that balance is important. So you're on this mission to reshape the justice system. And so I just thought I would begin with that and allow you to just take that wherever you want to go with that.
Okay. Yeah, and that definition and statements related to that are very powerful. And I think you really hit the nail on the head, and this is how I also teach it, right? Restorative justice is a framework that focuses on harm and how do we get to healing. You never hear that word healing in the justice system, right? You may in the treatment courts, and we talk about those a little later, but that in and of itself, is a huge shift away from the traditional system. And I do believe you're absolutely correct. It's about us trying to put in practices and connections so that we right relationships, because harm can destroy relationships, can impact relationships, etc. And in doing so, I want to first acknowledge with respect and gratitude the deep roots of restorative justice in indigenous tribes and Native Americans used it. They understood what it meant by healing and connectedness and relationships. And so we take from some of their practices when we're doing our restorative justice work. And I think the biggest thing, the difference between the traditional system and us, is that we, in the restorative justice field, we're challenged to rethink what conflict, harm, and consequence is about. And we do that, right, by asking different questions. You hit on the traditional questions. So let's just talk a little bit about what are the questions that we ask when we are in facilitated dialogue, right? We're bringing people together as opposed to separating them like the traditional system does. So we ask questions. And the first one is, who has been harmed? And while the traditional system will focus on the offender, the person who is harmed, and how do we bring them to justice, we don't sideline the victims. We don't sideline people who have experienced harm. We actually elevate them. We center them. We want to hear their story, which is the second question. What was the harm? We can look at a statute and understand the elements of the crime and say, okay, that is the harm, right? Your car was stolen, you were battered, whatever the crime is, and we fit the facts to that in the traditional system. In the restorative justice work that we do, we use storytelling, mostly the victims, but we use storytelling to focus on and help us get a better understanding of the ripple effect of harm, right? So not only did you steal my car, but I couldn't get to work, so I lost my job. I couldn't support my family, on and on and on, right? Not only did you, hit me, I couldn't go to work because I was in the hospital. I had hospital bills. You disrupted my sense of safety. All of those things that pull away from right relationship. And then the third question, which is getting to the one that goes beyond what the traditional system does, is how do we all work together? The person who has been harmed, the person who has harmed somebody, and community. How do we all come together, work together to address the needs of the victim and sometimes the offender too? And how do we repair that harm, right? And so you need to know what the harm is, what are the needs, and then to figure out the obligations. Who is responsible for putting right that relationship that was impacted negatively by the harm of crime. So those are, it's a whole unique way of looking at justice and what we want to focus on and get to in the long run.
Well, yeah, it's a more holistic approach because the punishment, while one tool, right, doesn't address harm. Locking somebody up might remove them or be a punishment, but it doesn't really heal or repair the harm that was done. I love it. And also it makes the community feel more responsible, I think, because it really is the breakdown of relationship that can also cause certain people to be susceptible to causing harm and to being susceptible to being victims. So it really is a more holistic look at even what is harm. Like, I like that. It doesn't say just crime. It's like harm. What is harm?
Right. What is harm and what are the
Yeah,
consequences of harm?
right.
Yeah, I think
So,
you're really, you understand very well about hearing all the stories about what happened. So it's
yeah,
like what happened to you instead of what's wrong with you, which you hear in the world of trauma and trauma-informed care, right? You want to get that story because that's the only way you can really figure out how people can move forward in their lives and continue the healing process, which the traditional system is not equipped to do most often.
right.
And I don't think it's for everybody. I
Mhm.
mean, what we
Yeah.
say is that people who harm have to, number one, accept responsibility
Yes.
and be willing to work in community to repair the harm. And
Yes.
so I think you'll always have the traditional system um, to deal with some of the significant harms that are done, but it is a process and it is an option. And that's what we're trying to do. Move it forward as an option in the justice system to help communities heal.
Yeah. Great. So just for my viewers, my listeners won't know that in the background are two cats milling around. So I am aware of that. I hope that won't be too distracting for people. They're actually behaving. They're not wrestling right now. So anyway, and this is a great segue to my next question, which is, and again, I'm going to bring sort of depth psychology perspective to it, but one of the challenges of transcending this patriarchal black and white, system and these wounds is being able to hold the tension between two concepts or ideas. When it comes to criminal justice, for example, I find there's this knee-jerk reaction that when I talk about, that's interesting, I wonder how that happened. And I might wonder about the actual perpetrator and how they came to be, I don't know how that happened, how they came to this place where they actually harmed another person. And somebody might say, oh, you're excusing the behavior. And I'm like, no, I'm seeking to understand because don't we want to reduce the likelihood that other people might actually find themselves swept up sometimes, right? And then there are other situations where, that's a hardcore criminal, but there's these other people that also get swept up in crime because of their own trauma. So I just find it interesting that, I feel like the climaxing right now of this like patriarchal wound is this. There's some people who are becoming more extreme and more rigid in this black and white, but it also is countered by a consciousness raising and a consciousness enlightenment and people really reflecting that there is this projection that we all do onto the other. And really, we are called today to self-reflect about our own role in the systems in which we live. So anyway, so I'm interested Carl Jung had a concept called the transcendent third. So if we are able to hold the tension between these two things, like what is the root? What is the deeper root and deeper trauma behind this? And at the same time, what is the appropriate remedy, which includes punishment, right? And maybe community service or repairing the harm. Like if we can hold that, then we end up with a new idea. If we can hold that tension, something new, a new understanding, a new idea will emerge. So anyway, that's my depth psychology perspective. And I think restorative justice is an old approach. that we're circling back to, but we're also finding a new way to apply it where we are in our, in our evolution. So you can respond to that, or also wondering about if you could share some concrete ways that you've integrated when you were in the court system, that you work to integrate a restorative, a justice approach. And let's see, there were a couple of things that came up in the interview with Derek Mosley that I think sort of audience participants were brought up. This the Unified Children and Family Project, or the program for babies that are impacted by substances. And just using some concrete examples of not only the program, but maybe sharing a story, because we all relate to the concepts better through story. So
We do, which is part of restorative justice,
yeah,
right?
right.
That's perfect. I'd like to make one comment. So I was a judge for almost 20 years. 9 of those years were at children's court. And, I certainly, when you try to do things differently and reshape what we're trying to do to better serve our community and make them safer and reduce reoffending and all of those things, you often get called soft on crime, right? So it's you're doing that, but you're giving the offender a pass, right? Or you're not holding them accountable or whatnot. And I've found with restorative justice, it is one of the hardest things that offenders have to do, is to meet and confront somebody that they have harmed, sometimes significantly, and apologize or listen to their story, because 9 times out of 10, it engenders empathy, right? I didn't know that person, so it was easy for me to rob them, right? And I was in the justice system and they never showed up in court. And so it's just easy for me. I'll accept responsibility because they have all the evidence against me, but I never have to face the person that I've harmed, right? And so it's a lot easier to do that than to sit in a circle or sit in a victim offender dialogue and actually hear the harms you've committed. So I just wanted to say that. And I think in the traditional system, we'll often say, well, is that working so well for us, right? We have a lot of recidivism. We have a lot of people who come out still harmed when they've been imprisoned. They end up back in. So it's this constant cycle. So it's somewhat about strengthening communities, strengthening people, and making sure that we're getting it right, from that holistic model. So children's court, lots of stories. The district attorney's office at children's court was using a restorative justice with our youth, and it was mostly crimes where youth had been doing it for the first time, and it was on a whim or whatever, and it was something that victims wanted to meet their youth who had committed a crime against them. And so one of the situations that was brought to our attention was a young two young kids, 14 and 15-year-old, and they decided they were going to go down to actually it was a couple of them, more than just 2, but they decided at 2 a.m. they were going to go to a small dealership, a person who was doing car sales. And in the middle of the night, they were going to just slash tires, break windows, just criminal damage to property. And ultimately, like many kids, they were on video, and so they got caught. And as the criminal, or as the juvenile justice system waned on, right, they get charged, they get brought up in court. They have an attorney. You're not supposed to talk to anybody but your attorney. So we're starting to separate people. We're not bringing them together. And the public defender of one youth said, what, this is his first offense. He's never done something like this before, and he's really wants to accept responsibility. Let's see if the car dealership person who was harmed would like to come and have a facilitated restorative justice dialogue. And so we did. We pulled one youth into a dialogue. We had the car dealership person who was harmed. We had a couple other community members. I think the youth's mother was there as
Mm.
well, and the facilitator. And what did we do? We asked the questions that I just said. Who was harmed? What is the harm and the ripple effect of harm? And how are we going to repair the harm? And the youth was very quiet, just sitting there listening to everybody. It almost looked like he didn't care, but he was listening. And when the gentleman who had his business ransacked got up, he started telling a story. And his story centered around the fact that because of the harm, because of the damage, he couldn't open for about a week. And he had one or two other employees, and he had to let those employees go because he couldn't pay them because they weren't selling cars, and it was a small dealership, right? And he then told us about one of the individual employees had a child on the way, very young family. And so he was stuck with no pay. And how do you support your family when you're not being paid? And so as he's recounting that, the youth is fidgeting. And finally, after other people were talking, it came turn for the youth to respond. And, he thought very authentically, he said, I didn't know that this was going to have such an impact. My mother lost her job
Mm.
when I was in, 6, 7, 8 years old, and I have no father. And I saw in her, right, the incredible struggles that she had to try to feed us, to keep us enclosed, to get us into schooling. And so that was the aha moment for the restorative justice, right? It was, this child was able to take the story, internalize it, empathize with the individual, and come out saying, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. And that's when restorative justice works its finest, right? And that's what you want to see, because otherwise it's a revolving, door with these youth coming into children's court. And so building
And
that empathy is really important.
And I love that story. And you could even slow it down more and sort through more, because what was that moment? It was like a common wound that connected and sparked that insight. And another reason I just love the story for so many reasons, but it reminds me of the concept when I learned like what nonviolent resistance approach was from a psychological perspective. So in nonviolent resistance, the reason that it works, this is my spin on it, is that somebody who's got some kind of aggression going on, looking for an outlet to commit a crime, do harm, whatever, also expects to be reacted to in a certain way. And it's sort of like it's a codependent sort of thing that happens. And when that person responds, so in a nonviolent resistance, you hear these stories where someone responded differently and it threw that person off because they're like, I'm not used to like not being met with aggression back to me.
Mhm.
And so in that disruption, there's a space that opens up. And what you do at that space, the possibility is for this deep connection. And deep connection can only happen in vulnerability. So one of the things that the restorative justice, that circle, is doing is it's creating a safe space to be vulnerable. And that's the only time a deep connection can really happen. So the other part of it is that I found to be even more amazing about that story is that the car dealer then went on to hire, I don't know if he volunteered or he actually paid him for a few hours, but that was so gracious. But I think in that moment, there was also an understanding, not excusing, an understanding on the victim's part of the complexity of this perpetrator's life as well. And that, inviting him then to come and work and clean up his mess symbolically, right? Like, oh my gosh, it just makes the story. I mean, the story's already powerful, but I mean, it's more really gets at something deeper that has to do with our universal human needs for, this deep connection and how we impact each other's life. So, um,
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And I find so we do a lot of preparation before because you don't want to go into circle and it's a debate or it's a finger pointing or
right.
there's some of the you can, get out your anger and frustration, but really the
Yeah.
goal is to have a civil dialogue,
Right.
right? Where we wouldn't necessarily in court or anywhere else. And so it takes the temperature down, right? And it allows people to go into their more deep listening mode of storytelling. And you're right. I think the youth thought, no matter what we told them in preparation, thought, I'm going to get yelled at. This guy is really mad. So is the community, right? But to be able to share back and forth, and then again, the end result, harm repair. How are we going to help repair the harm? Is the last question. What can you do, right? Restitution, when you have a youth, is not always going to be fruitful because they don't have any money, right?
Right.
But to actually have to go to the dealership and work with this gentleman, both of them work together, was just an absolute plus. And frankly, sometimes what victims want is a simple, authentic apology. And
Yeah.
you don't often get that when you're sitting in court and someone's going to be sentenced because they're like, oh yeah, they're apologizing, but is it authentic? Because
Yeah.
they don't know all of the significant ripple effect of harm that happened to me. And I want to tell them that story. I
Yeah.
want a story tell. I want an honest apology. I want to feel safe, right? All of those needs that don't get met in the traditional system, we're trying to meet in the restorative justice dialogue.
Right. And it reminds me of what it's the Zeidler Center for, and because I went through some of their training in that, the story is told from my perspective. Not It's not a you, it's a here's what happened to me because of your action. And the perpetrator, not always, like you said, is more likely to understand when the story is told from that perspective, right? Then in court, it's about, or traditional, it's about you did this, right? And this is your punishment instead of like the opportunity to really understand the harm that they did. So, oh, I just think
You
it's
got it.
I love it. I love it. So there okay, so I just talked about that. Oh, trauma informed. So that was really interesting too, because I have a little bit of knowledge of trauma informed when I was working at Playworks and understanding trauma informed care, trauma informed approach in different ways, but not really in the perspective that uh you talked about in teaching law students or lawyers or people in the court system or criminal justice or all these other areas of like, how does that come in? So I just like, how does lawyers, newbie lawyers, baby lawyers learning about trauma informed approach or care or whatever, however you talk about it, how does that end up, impacting them in, as they go out into the world to be a lawyer?
Yeah, that's a great question. So attorneys, lawyers are, trained to be analytical.
Mhm.
Just get the facts, right? We're going to process. We're going to take a look at the facts and then the law, and we're going to, like I said, just be more analytical about how we go about things. But we're also, right? We're in the people business, right? We have to zealously represent and advocate for our client or get them through a court process or some sort of negotiation or some issue they're dealing with. And what we know to be true, especially in the criminal and juvenile justice system, child welfare system, and probably even with the eviction work that we do, is that trauma is significantly prevalent amongst those justice involved people or people who come to the courthouse
Yeah.
seeking some resolution of their disputes. And so we have to be mindful of that because that can impact, right, everything that we do. It can impact the facts that you get from a witness who might be, triggered by something that's going on. It might impact their performance in the courtroom because they're coming to a place where they have to, face the person that harmed them. And so it just, in a myriad of ways, it impacts people's behavior, how they feel about a situation, how they build trust and respect with their attorney.
Mm.
Right? And which is really important when you're trying to be a good lawyer, and trying to do your job that you're supposed to do. And so what we do is we tell lawyers, hey, here's the definition. Here's how people present and what you have to be mindful of looking for when you're engaging with them. What does a trauma response look like, right? Because it can be sheer anger on one end, and on the opposite end, it could be, depression, not talking, not being able to give you the facts and the information that you need. And so you have to understand that in the symptoms as well. And then resources. If I know you're struggling with, some traumatic experience, I might, because I don't have the expertise to deal with that, I'm going to refer you to organizations in the community that can help reduce that trauma so that you can work better with me in the court system. So you want, knowledge of resources, et cetera. And you really want to sit back and deeply listen, right? You want to be present for them. You don't be watching your, clock waiting for your next client to come in.
Yeah.
And you want to create a safe space for interviewing, conversations. You may want to take them to the courthouse before the trial, get them to walk through so they're comfortable with it. So there's a myriad of ways that we can be present and understand trauma so that it helps us and our clients navigate systems. The other thing I would say is we teach them how to understand their own trauma, lawyers, right? Judges, and how secondary trauma, vicarious trauma, you bringing your own primary trauma, right, into a courtroom, and that's impact on whatever you're trying to accomplish. Be wary and understanding of that. And so I think that's really important. One thing that we've found through research is that if you are a judge and you are experiencing stress, high degrees of stress and trauma, your fail-safe is to go back into all those implicit biases, right?
Yes.
That you harbor because you're tired, right? It's your fail-safe. It's all of those things that you don't want to do, just do it easy, get it done, right? So we want judges and lawyers to be aware of how this topic impacts all of the work they do, both with their client and for their client.
Oh my God, you're speaking my language. You're using a depth psychology approach. I mean, this makes me so excited. A couple of things came up for me when you were talking about like even the response to being in a courtroom. That can, for those of us who have an authority complex, and I assume like a lot of either perpetrators and victims have like authority complexes because they were, whatever, abused, mistreated by a father figure. And the court system is very much, even if it's a woman judge, it's a very masculine place. It also, then that takes me to, in my old consulting gig, I would work with schools and a lot of charter schools that serve the inner city. And that in the demographic of kids who live, and most of them come from, a disadvantaged situation. And the worst thing for me was to hear a principal say, "Oh, parents don't come. Parents don't come to parent-teacher conferences because they don't care." And I'm like, why are you assuming that? Do you think it might be possible that the parents of these children had an awful educational experience? And they might actually feel fear and might feel emasculating actually coming into the school. So one of one of the teachers of the school actually started holding parent-teacher conferences at the bowling alley. And they did bowling and they got pizza. And guess what? The attendance at parent-teacher conferences went way up because they created a neutral space. Right.
Building relationships.
Oh my gosh. Right. Exactly. So all of that stuff comes up for me and more. And also the self-reflection and self-knowledge. I've always thought that part of graduating from high school, you should already learn about your own parental complexes. That's what we call it in depth psychology speak, which is you are taking, whether your childhood was great or not, all of your patterns of either surviving or just
Mhm.
being are rooted in your very early childhood experiences. Some of them serve you very well, some of them don't. And some of them, when you're trying to expand in some way, trigger the anxiety and then they're not helpful anymore. So I love that you're, even for judges to be self aware, because we only know about 20% of who we are and why we're doing what we're doing. And so you may be driven. I remember the moment when I discovered the other agenda for being an activist, and it was to feel validated.
Mhm.
That's not the right motivation to be an activist. It doesn't mean I didn't do great work, but it means that I was needy.
Yeah.
And so to do something out
You
of
know,
need to fill a hole in your soul does not make you as effective as you could be, because you can't separate your own trauma. Oh my gosh, this excites me so much.
mhm.
So let's see. Oh, another thing, yeah, I think we shared enough examples, but one of the things that is my next question is I would love for you to share, like, how can people bring this into their life? So, for example, with my depth psychology coaching clients, um, I teach them a tool called Start with Heart. It's a
Mm.
principle from a book that came out in 2004 that was rather like a well-known bestseller called Crucial Conversations. And it had 9 principles. You don't need them, but the first principle works very well. And it's called Start with Heart because there is this sort of recognition that even if I have a conflict with you, I care about you. Maybe I can't stand you, but I care about you as a human being anyway. So I created my own template that starts with I statements. So in the conversation, it might be, I've noticed this, right? It's a data point. And I think that if this continues, well, this is one of the natural conclusions, not
Mhm.
really heading the right way. And I feel this is how it makes me feel. I feel
Yeah.
disrespected. I feel whatever it is. And here's what I want. What I want for me is, what I want for you is that you trust me or whatever it is. So you care about the other person. And what I want for our relationship is that we can talk about these things. And so in the end, I would love to start doing this. What do you think? So like it works like magic when you follow this template. And now that I think about it, I think this is a kind of restorative approach. And it's just a every day. Like I have to go have a conversation with my boss and that makes me sweat. Or I have to complain or I have to fire somebody or whatever it is, that this approach and this template is that it's relationship oriented. And that reminds me of, like, maybe that falls under restorative.
Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right. I think restorative practices can be put to play and, at the Thanksgiving dinner table when
Mm,
you're talking about issues. We see it being used, at schools, school discipline kind of cases, you know, put it to practice, in, businesses who are struggling, with keeping employees and trying to figure out like what's engendering
mm,
employees to leave. I mean, there's so many applications. I think the other, not just the questions we ask about harm and the ripple effect and how to heal from that, but in circles, we use a little bit of a different approach. And we have some ground rules and a talking piece we use. And so if you have the talking piece, that's the only time you can talk
okay.
instead of, everyone talking
Mm,
over or through or under each other, right? And the question is often a very general question that everyone can answer.
mm,
Um, and you can really only answer it from your experience instead of me like in circle saying, oh, Deb, what you just said, I don't like that and I disagree and blah, blah, blah.
mhm,
So one of the questions in general might be something like, describe a time or reflect on a time where you've experienced violence. Okay. Anybody can answer that question, right? Whether you know somebody or you experienced it yourself or you saw it in the media and that has impacted you. And so it it really sort of encapsulizes how we're going to answer it from the bottom of our hearts authentically through storytelling, so that in some way someone's going to impact another person in a very profound way. And it's not going to be about debate, and it's not going to be about holding somebody responsible, but you're answering these questions. So then I get to know you more, Deb,
Right.
when you answer that question. Oh my God, you went through the same thing I did, right? And so you create those relationships and you build those and you're stronger. And then you can go deeper and ask different kinds of questions until you get to the harm repair question, right? Which is like,
Right.
what do we want to take away from this meeting? What's the one thing we're going to do over the next 3 months based upon this circle that we're going to make a difference in people's lives or our own, right? So it's a little play on that, but it's really easy to do with family and friends and other people who are struggling. It's that
Yeah.
civil dialogue that we all struggle with lately, right? It's about that deep listening where we're really hard for us to say, oh, wait, I'm going to think of something. I'm not going to pay any attention to them because I got to think of what I'm going to say next in counterpoint
Right.
to what they're saying, right? Pulls you out of that.
Yeah.
And that's why it's just really powerful in some settings, because it's something we all crave, connection
Yeah.
to each other in a profound way.
And also whether people know it or not, it's really helping them self-reflect about how they're projecting their experience onto the other
Mhm.
based on their experience, which that is what we do. There is no other way. We project. That's just what we do. But as you are forced to only speak from your experience, that forces you to like kind of take back your projection and become aware of like, whoa, like I've never talked about it this way from only my perspective. And then you listen to another person and then you're like, whoa, they're speaking from their perspective. And it sort of makes you, because, we're into the other, and we don't
Yep,
sometimes even realize that what we just look at a person and we're making assumptions. You call them unconscious biases, right? But it's a kind of projection at what we're not able to explore in ourselves.
yep,
And so I imagine that people walk away from those experiences processing in a way that they're not even fully conscious of, and may change them. They may show up in the world in a different way. That's
that's
amazing.
right. That's
Yeah.
right. Absolutely.
So, okay, so we're coming to the end, and I wonder if there's anything else that you want to share that you think is important for people to know, whatever it is. And also, I'm going to include the link to that page, and maybe later on you can send me links that if people are interested in, just, I don't know, there might be an article about how do you bring this to your company? How can you do this at Thanksgiving dinner? What? That really piqued my interest because, the holidays are difficult these days with what's going on. And then also, I do you want people to follow you? Are you on Instagram? Or I know you're not like all that, but like people like to follow people who have interesting things to say, and then whatever else. So however you want to tie it up.
Oh, so we do have the Andrews Center for Restorative Justice has a place in the Marquette University Law School's website. And if you go there, you will see that we have, frequently asked questions. We have information. That's where you found the definition that I put together. We have videos, and there's also a link to one of our librarians who has done significant research and pulled together a lot of reading
Ooh.
materials and
Oh,
articles on restorative justice. Um, and what I also want to say is, for 20 some years, we've had a restorative justice initiative here at the law school, and retired Justice Janine Geske was the one that founded it and nurtured it and built this wonderful, wonderful foundation. She's my mentor. I still get to call her when I need to about what we're going to do and not do. And she's got so many connections, both statewide, locally, nationally, and internationally. And so some of the videos are on her work using restorative justice in the clergy abuse scandal.
mm,
We've done things on bullying and restorative justice. We just did, the last one was restorative justice and the deep roots of restorative justice in First Nations and Native American peacemaking. And so there's a lot of stuff, good stuff to read on and look at on the website. And then
Yeah,
there's some general videos where you can say, here's sort of how you do it. Not
perfect.
completely. We also say, it really should be professionally guided civil dialogue, because what we don't want to see happen, that happens often in the justice system, is that our processes and practices reharm,
Yeah.
right? And so when you're doing these dialogues, especially when there's deep pain and grief and suffering and harm, including some things that the offender might be dealing with, let alone
Yeah.
the victim and the community, you have to be careful about how you do your restorative practices or your restorative justice. That's why I'm teaching law students, because they're our next generation of lawyers going out in the community, and we want them to be facilitators of restorative
Mm.
justice. We want to see them help reshape the justice system from not just a procedural standpoint, but a policy standpoint. And so I'm excited about the students I have. They're excited about this work and doing it, and they're really uniquely positioned in this world of conflict resolution because of what they do when they go out in community as lawyers. So
Yeah, it's a really good point. It's like you you can't you know that saying about doctors make the worst patients. Therapists make the worst, you can't do it on yourself. So like often I am seeing a client, I'm seeing the woman in a, man woman
yeah,
relationship, but I'm also seeing him, and I can do that because I'm a coach. And then I can see them together and facilitate. It's like play. And it reminds me of, I'm sure Dr. Bob Pavlik.
mhm,
He facilitates circles. It's a different kind of circle. The kind of circle he facilitates is when somebody's really struggling with like a big life question, and he
sure,
pulls people to, but just this idea of facilitating. I wanted to say something about bullying real quick, because I have a memoir coming out, and there's
mm,
there's a scene that I start a chapter with, because I was bullied
mm,
at a very young age. And there's this I think, guided and this false narrative about how liberating it is to stand up to a bully. And so I described this, I was mercilessly bullied. And then there
so
was that
sorry.
day when I came into the classroom, and of course there wasn't a teacher there, and all the kids are standing around, and there she was, Ginger, my nemesis. And she started walking toward me, and something took me over, and I did push her so hard. It wasn't me. And I pushed her so hard she fell backwards over a desk. Now you would think like, yeah, right. And my memory is feeling so depleted of standing up to her. I was like, seriously, like, this is my life.
Yeah,
Like, it was not liberating to have to forcefully stand up to a bully. I was like, seriously, I have to do this. It's exhausting.
yeah, yeah.
So I don't know. That just comes up for me when we talk about the topic.
Yeah, and I'm sorry you had to deal with, and there's so many people out there that have had
Mhm.
to deal with it, and they've
Yeah.
carried it for their entire lives, right?
Yeah.
And yet, the use of restorative practices, again, you ask in those same questions: who's been harmed, what's the harm, and how do we
Yeah.
repair it? And if you can get people, both those who have been bullied and bullies, into a circle, and it's a lot easier, I think, with younger kids, right?
Yeah.
Because um, I
They
think they're
get
more
it.
willing. They get it,
They
but
get everything faster.
right. But then you can sort of understand often too where the bully is coming from, right?
Well, yeah. And I think,
And to help him repair or her repair that harm in themselves is really key.
and I think there's more understanding of, wounded people wound other people. So there is, I think, that the truth of that situation is making its way into culture and movies and
Mhm.
that sort of thing, that, that's a child who's suffering, that is carrying trauma that needs to be like expressed. And so their unconscious is literally looking for a way to express it. Like their
Right.
unconscious is like, there she is, I boom, gonna project it onto her. So, but my point was, even being like the victim of that perpetrator is like, No, it did not please me to fight her back. I did not want to
Yeah.
hurt. I don't want to hurt her back. Like I literally just want to breathe, you know? So
Well,
anyway,
it's a lot like, right, you have to be held accountable for your harms,
mhm,
right? But it's in how you do that, right?
yeah,
That makes a difference. So,
yeah,
punishment is probably something that, may work for some, but likely not, and not
right.
certainly not for all. And so, how do you move towards a more civil dialogue related to those harms to get them so they'll stop the bullying? That's what you
Yeah.
wanted. I want the bullying to stop.
Right.
I mean, victim of crime. I just don't want it to ever happen to me again.
I want to
I
feel
want to
safe.
feel
Yeah.
safe.
Right.
I
Yeah.
feel safe.
So speaking, so funny. Well, not funny if when you're in depth psychology, circling back, when I was running Playworks, the first school that I went to
Mm.
visit was that school, Allen Field.
Oh, jeez.
And they were a Playworks school. So it was like, whoa, whoa, circling back. And my program director, who's now head of it in Milwaukee, we shared, we had such an interesting working relationship. He's like, yeah, I was the bully and I've been trying to make up for it ever since. Oh my
Hmm.
God, what a beautiful story, right? Like,
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
we are great ambassadors. Anyway, so this has been so great. Thank you, Mary,
You're
for a
welcome.
conversation full of depth and hope.
Thank you. I appreciate your time with me.
Yeah. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Mary Triggiano, former chief judge and new director of Marquette University Law School's Andrews Center for Restorative Justice. You'll find some links in the description box for more about the topic of restorative justice. Until next time.